Hi, I'm Phil.
And I'm Lauren, and we're Live Transformed.
So we're picking up in the story of Abram. Last week we talked a lot about faith. We talked about his faith and his trust with God. We actually got to go into Hebrews 11 and look at the definition of faith, look at his life, the things that he did. We even look back to Job and we see the faith of Job through the trial and the sickness. And for Abram, we see faith as a trust and a obedience to go somewhere that you don't know where you're going, to take your family, to go to this new land and just trust that God will show you where, that you'll be safe, that you'll be provided for, all these different things. So faith is how we ended, and today we're going to talk about what happened.
Hey, if you want to support Live Transform, please subscribe to our channel. Please like the videos, and please share them with people you think may benefit from hearing the information that we give.
We'd love for you to comment and let us know more material that you'd like to hear about. It also helps YouTube share our channel with other people, so be sure to comment on what you like and what you'd like to hear more of.
We can't wait to see you.
You know, as soon as he gets there, some things do happen. And just because God tells you to go somewhere doesn't mean there's not going to be trials and tribulations and difficulty. The beauty of what we know from the Word of God is that God's going to walk with you through it. He promises to go before you, stand beside you, never leave you, never forsake you. So we can trust in what God tells us to do as the best thing for us to do, regardless of what you may go through on the way there.
Yeah, and that can be hard, but I feel like that's why God puts these stories and people in the Bible so that they can give us hope that it's the same God. So if it worked for Abram, it'll work for me to trust God. We also see, like you said, it can be hard sometimes. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not what God called him to do.
So we'll just talk through this part. But Abram gets there, and then, he lives there for a while, and there's a famine. When the famine happens, Abram decides he needs to go down to Egypt where he can survive. And so he goes to Egypt, and him and his wife, he tells them it's his sister, which makes sense. I mean, it's a lie. And this is the part of Abram we can see the human side of him, like the side like us where we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. He lies, and then, a plague comes upon the Pharaoh because he has his wife in his palace, and all this stuff happens. And he's like, why did you lie to me? And Abram's like, well, I didn't want to die. I didn't want you to kill me because of my beautiful wife. And so he said it was his sister. And as we get through all that and get to chapter 13, which is where we're going, he comes back to the land of Canaan, the land that God promised him. And that's where he sets up with him and his nephew Lot. Now, him and Lot are blessed by God. And there's some strife that happens. We have a war. We have Abram saving Lot. We have kings, the king of Sodom and Melchizedek, who we'll discuss later, approach Abram after this. And so a lot happens here. But the storyline is the same. It's Abram continues to show his trust and his faith in God. So we're going to pick up in chapter 13. We're going to start off in verse 2 through 13. And we're going to just take a look at this whole issue that happened when they came back to the land of Canaan. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar to the Lord at first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot went with Abram. He also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land would not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. So we see as he comes back, he's blessed. People act like God's people can't be blessed. If you have money, if you have all this, then you don't love God. Money is a root of evil, is not the root of evil. If God has your heart, which we've talked about, it doesn't matter if you have finances. Honestly, if you have finances and all these things, God's probably the one who gave it to you if you're a believer and you're following him. Now, you can get things from Satan. I'm not saying that, but the point here is Abram has a lot. Him and Lot have so much, they can't even fit all their stuff and, have their animals and herds living off this land. I mean, that shows you. He told him to go there, and on the way to Egypt and on the way back up to here, God has blessed him to the point where they have too much in too small of a space. And it's not like they're in like an enclosure. They're in a large piece of land.
Right. And, they just went to Egypt because of a famine. So clearly God protected them if they're coming out of Egypt with this much stuff. We see this is an example of God's provision for his people. God always provides, because if you were just in a famine, you wouldn't expect to be leaving that area with especially the livestock. So that's God, God provides.
All right, so we're going to pick up in verse 8. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. All right, so we see Abram is the one God told to go. You go to the land of Canaan. Abram really is the older. So Abram should be the one saying, if you think about it, I'm going to take what I want. But he is the man of God that he continues to show us that he is, says, you let there be no strife between us. You choose. If you go this way, I'll go that way. If you go that way, I'll go this way. So Lot scopes out the land and says, the land right there east of the Jordan is awesome. It's well watered. My cattle will love it. I have space. Not considering that he is moving close to Sodom, which is told to us, and if you've read the Bible before, you already know is an evil city. Mm-hmm. He's worried about himself. He's worried about his job. He's worried about, being prideful and saying, I want the best. I'm not worried about anybody else, which in some ways is pretty much what we all do at times.
It's really easy to do.
Yeah.
It's really easy to do that. It's easy to look at Lot and be like, oh, he's selfish. He took the good land. But don't we do that? Don't we plot ways to make things work for us, ignoring God and the benefit of other people? And sometimes it's not necessarily, I don't know, it doesn't say in the Bible if Lot was really just focused on himself and didn't care about Abram. Sometimes,
but it was evident.
Yeah, but sometimes we make decisions not to harm the other person. We just don't even think about them. Yeah. We're only thinking about ourselves. And so because we're thinking about ourselves, it ends up being a selfish act. Even though that wasn't necessarily our intent, we just weren't thinking about anyone.
But you also weren't thinking about the other person.
Exactly.
Because if we're purposely thinking of others, like Abram was.
Right.
Abram was like, well, even though, he didn't say this, but he's like, he could have thought this. I'm thinking it. Mm-hmm. Even though God told me, and even though I've taken care of you, and I've blessed you, mm-hmm. and I've brought you with me, and I brought you back, and you have all this stuff because of me, he said, I still want to give you mm-hmm. first choice. Let me put you ahead of myself.
Right. Which is why we feel like it's just so important to read the Bible, because this is how you see who should you be, Abram or Lot. When you're thinking through situations in your life, are you considering other people? What is God telling me to do? Who is this going to harm if I make this decision? How could I benefit other people? Abram's thinking of everyone but himself. Lot's thinking of only himself. And so, that's an example for us to live by. And I also think, too, in this, we see God's sovereignty. Abram was going to Canaan. One way or another, he was going to Canaan because that's what God said. But in this situation, Lot was given the choice. So Lot decided to go to the Jordan Valley, but really God was working all things out just as he had planned. Sometimes you can wrestle with that as, did he have free will? Well, it says he did. Abram gave him the choice, but we see that God's plan will work out no matter what.
And there are consequences to your decisions. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the fact that Lot moved over next to an evil city. Well, guess what? There was kings fighting kings. And when the kings that wanted that beautiful land we just talked about, you go get something like that, well, that could be coveted by somebody. Mm-hmm. Well, it happens to be that it was. And these kings come after the king of several cities. So several cities go after several cities, and Lot just happens to be an innocent bystander. But guess what? You're right there next to this city that somebody wants to take, and they did. And they defeat, the king of Sodom and several other cities, and along with the spoils, which is the city, all the goods, and the people, women and children and the men, obviously. And so therefore, Lot now becomes part of this whole people in captivity because he decided to go live where these evil people were, and they were just overtaken by somebody. All right. So we're going to pick up the part of the story where Lot has been captured by these kings, and these kings now have them, and they've taken over all this area. We're in chapter 14, verse 14. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. So now we see Abram. Abram finds out about this and goes, not on my watch. We see the blessing of Abram. Abram clearly has a strong, now he doesn't have a lot with him. He's got 318, but you don't need a lot when God is on your side. I'm sure he checked with the Lord and found out that he's supposed to go do this. Once he did it, he took 318 men and he destroyed multiple kings, like 4 or 5. And he went there and took back everything. Basically because Lot was there, because Abram's not worried about all the other stuff. He wanted to get his family back, and he says his kinsmen. He goes, defeats them, gets all the stuff. So generally when you win a war, the spoils are yours. We just had multiple cities were overtaken. So not only did Abram take over those cities, he took all the stuff. So in reality, he could have taken everything. And so we're going to look at Abram's response next after he goes and does this. But one other point I want to make. When you see God tell people, we see it through the Israelites all these different times. They go in these wars and God's like, take this many people. And it's never as many as the other side because God's going to get the glory. God goes in there, he confuses the army, he puts them in a deep sleep. All these different things as you read through the Old Testament. The point is, you don't have to have as many people as the other people have. You just have to have God on your side. Clearly, he did not have anywhere near the amount of troops or trained men that the other people did, but he didn't need them. He needed 318. And that was plenty.
Yeah, and I think, whether your battle is in a war or whether it's just situations going on in your life, we don't fight the way the world fights. And so the Bible is clear that when God is for you, no one can be against you. And so there are times in our life, God's calling us to fight, and we feel unequipped. And we feel like, I'm sure Abram was like, what am I going to do with this? But he trusted what God told him to do. And so we don't need a big army if God's on our side. We have to trust God, and we have to trust his plans, and then we have to do what he says.
All right, so the next part, starting in verse 17, chapter 14, verse 17, Abraham's blessed by Melchizedek. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheva. This is the King's Valley. So that's that whole area we talked about that everybody was clearly wanting. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram, king of the Most High. By God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. So we see Melchizedek. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. And he is the king of Salem, which Salem represents peace or means peace. And that it's also believed that this was Jerusalem, later to be Jerusalem, but now at this point called Salem. So this king, it says he was a priest of God Most High. What is a priest? A priest is an intercessor between God and man. So Melchizedek was an intercessor between God and man, and clearly him and Abram are on the same page, because his whole thing was, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. He's telling us that he believes in the one God, the true God. Not only that, he says, blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. He's saying, Abram didn't go out and win that war. God won that war for him. So him and Abram are eye to eye right here saying, yes, we are standing in agreement. And Melchizedek is a representation or a type of Christ. As we see throughout the Bible, God continues to remind us back to Genesis 1, where he said pretty much he set everything in motion, and then we get into mankind's sin going into 2 and 3, and we see God create this sacrificial system, really telling us there needed to be sacrifice, there needed to be blood had to be shed to cover our sin. And we see examples of Christ coming, that and so he is a type of Christ, or an example of Jesus must come to save us. Melchizedek represents that here. We also have to talk about the king of Sodom. So the king of Sodom also met him. So there were 2 kings that came to meet him after this victory. The king of Sodom, evil. The king of Salem, Melchizedek, good. And like we always talk about, there's only good and evil. There is no in between. There's no gray area. There's no, I don't believe in some. If you're not for God, you're against him. That was told to us many times in the Bible. So just so we have all that straight. So we have good and evil represented by these 2 kings. And Abram gave him, this is referring back right after Melchizedek spoke to him, and Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you say I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. So Abram's like, king of Sodom's like, hey, you got all this stuff now. I just want the people. You go ahead and take everything. Abram's like, no, I don't want anything of yours. And, he's thinking, you're evil. And then he's like, you will not try to make it seem like you are the one that blessed me. I'm going to make it obvious that the only one that blessed me was God. Not only did Abram take on that responsibility to say, all of these spoils that are given to me, because remember, if you go defeat these cities and they had defeated these cities, you get the spoil of all of that. And he's like, no, I don't want any of that. I'm going to keep what God gave me. I don't need anything you have for me. And then he's going to give 1/10 of everything to Melchizedek, who represents or is the priest of God and represents the the priest of peace in the city of Salem.
Yeah, and I think one thing that this makes me think of is this whole situation happened because of a decision Lot made to go to the Jordan Valley near the city of Sodom, which was evil. And so sometimes I think, when we look at this, Abram is fighting a battle, being obedient to the Lord for a situation that really shouldn't have ever happened. But even in that, the Bible tells us God will make good of all things for those who are called according to his purpose. So even though Lot made a bad decision, God is using that decision to show himself. We see King Melchizedek come in, and we get a picture of Jesus in the middle of this situation. We see Abram give 1/10. So we start learning about a tithe and what it means to give back to God what he's already given to us. We see turning away from evil. So I think, when life gets you down and when you're in a situation that maybe you made a bad decision and you're in the middle of it, God can still bring good out of that. We have to seek, okay, God, what can I learn from this? How can you show me, how to get better, different decision to make? And again, Abram's not even the one who made the bad decision. This just encourages me because I feel like no matter what is going on, God is with us. He's ready to teach us. It won't be easy necessarily. We have to go through some trials and fight some battles. But look at what all we can glean from this situation because Lot made a bad decision.
And the cool thing is, as we look at Abram's faith, because we talked about that, and we talked about how Hebrews gives us the definition, and then we talked about how he just continues to exhibit or exude this faith. Then this is another example. It's like, most people given the opportunity to have, probably today equivalent of millions, maybe even billions of dollars worth of things. He's like, no, I'm too worried about focusing on God. I'm too worried about giving back to the Lord. And what he does is he doesn't really bless the king, Melchizedek. He's blessing God. He's saying, I'm giving back to God through my tithe to this priest king. And this priest king doesn't just represent the Jewish people. He represents all people. That was the cool thing about Melchizedek as a type of Christ, because Jesus came through the line, of David, and he came through the Israelite people, but he wasn't just for them. The priest then was a Levitical priest who was just for them. But Jesus came and he was for Jew and Gentile. And Melchizedek represented that, but he was pointing to Jesus saying, if you're a Gentile, which is us, if you're not Jew, it's anybody that's not Jew. Jesus is not just coming for them. He's coming for everyone. And so we get to see that here. That's the beauty of this. And if you don't understand that, Jesus is the whole point. The whole point of this is that apart from Jesus, there is no relationship with God. And if there's no relationship with God, then you're going to be banished to hell. But if you do have relationship with God through Jesus Christ, then you will be saved. That's what it means to be saved, to be born again, to have a relationship with God and be what you were created to be. Whether you know it or not, you were created to be in relationship with God. And so like Abram here, like Melchizedek, these people that back in a time where it was so easy to go astray, it still is now. I'm not saying that. But we focus on the Lord. And we do what Abram did. We be faithful. And we don't just be transformed. We live transformed. Look at Abram living transformed. He continues to make these decisions in the face of evil all the time. The opportunity to take spoils from these wars. That's what most kings or leaders did. They marched through the streets and showed you all the stuff they went and just took.
And I think if you relate more to Lot in this situation, like the person who feels like they can't make the right decision, God will place an Abram in your life. Abram was there to help Lot. He came and he rescued him, and God always provides. And so if you feel more like Lot than Abram, look around. God is providing someone in your life to say, come this way, follow me, because Lot's consequences are not over. We'll see, as we continue down this journey through Genesis, his consequences are not over, but God continues to provide for his people. And for Lot, he provided Abraham to guide him and save him and then be an example to him. Lot's clearly watching what he's doing here, and he's not taking the spoils, he's giving the tithe. And so I think, there's just so much we can learn from this. And if you feel like you relate to Abram, we need to be looking for people like Lot. Who can you guide? Who can you lead in the right direction?
And Abram made mistakes. We just talked about what he did in Egypt. So the point's not that he's perfect. The point is that even in his imperfection, he loved the Lord and he was obedient. Not all the time, clearly, but he was obedient to the big things, to what God was telling him to do. And his mindset was, how do I honor God even if I make mistakes? And so that has to be us. So we can't wait to pick up in the storyline next week. We look forward to seeing you, and we love you.